So when it comes to working with static files, you may use something called the CDN, or you may want to serve your static files yourself. Now, when I say serve, I mean that your web application is actually handling the static files in some form or fashion. Now, Django itself is not going to be doing that. It's something like Apache would handle it, or even like Amazon Web Services, or other things too. I mean, there's a lot of ways to actually go about handling it. But when you're testing locally, you still need to have the ability to see this stuff, right? To see your custom CSS, to see your custom JavaScript. These things are actually pretty important. Now, it works it's similar to how templates work in a way. It's not completely the same, but it is similar. So what I'm actually going to do is set up inside of my virtual environment. I'm going to make a new folder in here, and I'm going to call this folder called static_CDN. So this is emulating what your static server is going to look like. Again, Django should not be handling your static files. You should not be using a page like this to render CSS ever. You should use only what we're about to do. So inside of settings.py, we're actually going to scroll down to this URL that says static, this right here. So there's actually a little page on how to do this. We paste that page in. This will show us the things that we need to do. Now, it doesn't show everything perfectly, so that's why we're going to talk about it. The first thing I'm going to do is grab this static files dirs here, and I'm going to paste that underneath here. Right? So this is actually rather important. So this is where we're going to store our static files. So like if I had my own CSS, this is where I'm going to store it. This is not where it's going to come from for the end user. That is very confusing, but basically I need another folder in here saying my static. So I'm going to change it from static to being static-my local static, or rather my project. Static my project versus static CDN. And I'm going to use underscores still. Okay. So static my project inside of the same place as base dir, which is where db.sqlite 3 is, and also where templates are. So inside of src, we're going to make a new folder and call it static my proj, or static my project. So we see this new folder come in here. Okay. So there's that. And then the next one is static root. So this is where the folders will end up, or the files will end up. This is what's going to actually serve the files. That's what it's called, serving the files. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this right here and paste it here. And we're going to call it static CDN. Okay, so it's going into that static CDN folder. Unfortunately, the base directory is not that folder. So without understanding too much about OS path, we can do ospath.dirname and grab that. So what this is just saying is, hey, grab the directory name of the base dir. So whatever that base dir is, right? Whatever it is, grab that directory name, and then that's where this is going to go. So in other words, instead of it putting it into src, it's going to put it into e-commerce. And that's where our static root is. So this is how we actually set up our local static files. When you go live, it's a whole nother ball game, which we're not going to cover yet, but we will. But locally, that's what you're going to want to do. And the final step is actually serving these static files during deployment. Again, you're not going to want to do this on a live server. As it says right here, don't use for production code. I'll say that a million times if I have to, but you're still going to want the ability to see these static files working in action. So what I'm going to do here now is I'm going to go into urls.py, and I'm going to add in the ability to do this. So I'm going to go ahead and copy the two imports that it has, and I'm actually going to put them right there. And underneath my URL patterns, I'll do if settings.debug. I'll explain that in a second. And then I'm going to just go ahead and copy what they have here and change this to being that. Okay, so it's taking the original URL patterns up here and adding it in, and that's our new URL patterns. Okay, so settings.debug. Well, if we go to settings and we scroll up to debug, we see this security warning, don't run debug turned on in production. So what do you know? When this is false, our static files won't be served. That's exactly why that's done. Okay, so we save that and we go back into our project. Well, it seems like nothing happened. So I'm going to go into admin. You may or may not see the Django admin looking like this. But what I need to do is actually make sure that those static files are still there. But if we look here, notice it's looking for these things. It's actually saying that it finds them. Yours probably won't say that it finds them, but it's actually looking here versus where it may or may not have looked before. So again, your admin may have never looked like mine. So let's go ahead and just do Python manage.py collect static. So this is the command, Python manage.py collect with a T static. This is the command that you'll use to actually move your static files. Now that I have these and I run the server again, my admin should actually look as expected. Now, I'm not so worried about the admin. I'm actually more worried about my own static files. But what I will see is my static CDN now has something in here called admin. That's nice and all, but what if I want to have other things in this CDN? Well, let's go ahead and delete that. I'm going to delete that admin folder, go back into my settings, scroll to the bottom, and just put in static root, static_root. We'll save that. I'll run collect static again by pressing up, and now it puts it in something called static root. Now, this is important for this other idea of media root. So I'll just say media root, and this is going to be media root. And we'll put the media URL in here as well. So media URL equals to media. And then back into our URLs, I'm just going to copy this exactly and change the parameters, media URL and media root. So media files are whatever we upload ourselves. So we uploaded, we have our static root stuff set up. I'm just going to make sure that I have this folder. So I'll put in media root in here as well. So this is where files would be uploaded if we had it in our own project. Like if we upload any files inside of something called a model, that's where it's going to go. We definitely will talk about that later, but it's good and important to actually set this up as needed. Now, the next thing is this static in my proj, right? So my project static. So I'm going to make a new folder in here and I'll call it CSS. And I'm going to make a new file in here and I'll call it main.css. And all I'm going to do is say body, and I'll do color being to like a light gray. I'm going to save that, make sure there's actually content in it, and then I'm going to run collect static. We'll say yes. And what do you know? CSS jumps over here, and there's main.css. So all of this is doing is emulating a static server, right? So I put static CDN, but it's a static server, which is separate from our Django server. It's always separate. Again, like I said, it was Apache or AWS S3 or, you know, like other sort of CDN services. That's essentially what that's emulating. But we can also put images in here. So if I put a new folder, say IMG, and I want to put a image actually in there, let's say, for instance, like the beach, and I just do a quick search for that. We go to images, the beach. I'm going to view this image, and we'll go ahead and save this inside of our project. So going into our recent places, this is just a little shortcut. IMG here, of course, I'm in my project, dev, project, source, static, my proj, IMG, and I'm just going to call this beach. And what do you know? The beach saves. We look back into our project. There it is. It's working. Notice it's not in my static CDN yet. So that means I have to do collect static. I say yes. What do you know? There it is. It copied it and moved it over. Okay, so how do we actually use this stuff? Now, it's actually really simple. We go to any page that we want to use this static data on. So in this case, our home page. I'm going to put both of them in here. And I'm going to do load static. That is called a template tag. So we're loading the template tag of static. The first one is a style sheet, much like the Bootstrap style sheet. So I'm going to do link real equals to, not ref, but real style sheet. href equals to. Well, this is where we do our curly brackets and a percent sign, static, and the path. So that's CSS main.css. And then we just close that down. There we go. We've got our main CSS there. And let's go ahead and follow along with that idea and put the image in. And we'll just say img source equals to, again, static, and then the path. The path was img/beach.jpg. And we'll do class img fluid. And we'll close that off, save it, go back into our project, refresh on the home page. Let's make sure our project's running. It was not, so let's go to run server, go back, and I spelled static incorrectly. These things happen. Refresh. What do you know? There's gray text and an image. And if we inspect the element on this image, we see that it's coming from static/image/beach. We go into our settings and change the static from static to static ABC. We refresh in here. What do you know? The link is static ABC. That is the point of all of this. This is really important for local testing. Again, this is all local. These sorts of things, you would probably have different settings. Not probably, you will have different settings for when you go into production. When you go live, you will have much different settings. But in the meantime, this is it. This is our Hello World project. Hopefully you got something out of it. Obviously, this is one section in a bunch of other sections, but we've actually covered quite a bit in the inner workings of Django. There's still a lot more to come. Stay with us.